J Edgar Hoover kept Hollywood's darkest secrets. These are the 10 worst. The day after J Edgar Hoover died, his loyal secretary worked frantically through the night, feeding document after document into a shredder, burning America's most explosive secrets before anyone could find them. For 48 years, the FBI director had collected evidence so damning it could destroy Hollywood's biggest stars with a single phone call. Private recordings of bedroom conversations, photographs that could end careers in an instant, and proof that the movie industry itself was secretly controlled by organized crime. When Marilyn Monroe died, Hoover already had the autopsy results on his desk before the coroner even finished his report, revealed a former FBI agent who worked in the Bureau's Los Angeles office during the 1960s. That's how deep his surveillance went. He didn't just investigate Hollywood, he owned it. There wasn't a secret whispered in a Beverly Hills bedroom that didn't eventually reach his ears. Today, we're exposing the shocking contents of Hoover's legendary files, the secrets so explosive that many were deliberately destroyed within hours of his death, leaving America's most scandalous chapter partially erased from history. Most disturbing is the revelation that the very man tasked with upholding America's laws was himself compromised by organized crime. The files contained evidence of a stunning blackmail operation that allowed the mafia to flourish in Hollywood for decades, all because gangsters possessed photographs so damaging they effectively paralyzed the most powerful lawman in America. And the beloved Hollywood icon, whose double life was so thoroughly documented by FBI surveillance that agents could recite his daily routine from memory. A surveillance operation that threatened to destroy not just a legendary career, but the entire carefully constructed image of Hollywood's golden era. These weren't just salacious rumors or industry gossip. These were methodically compiled dossiers containing photographs, transcripts of wiretapped conversations, sworn statements, and detailed reports from a network of informants that reached into every level of the entertainment industry. But first, let's examine how Hoover came to possess Hollywood's darkest secrets, and how he used this information to hold an entire industry hostage to his personal agenda for nearly half a century.
In this period of national emergency, the strength of law enforcement is as important.
The Mafia's blackmail file on the FBI director, the most shocking file in Hoover's vast collection, wasn't about a Hollywood star, politician, or civil rights leader. It was about Hoover himself. According to multiple credible accounts, powerful organized crime figures managed to obtain compromising photographs of the FBI director, creating a Mexican standoff that would shape American law enforcement policy for decades. This was the ultimate irony, explained a historian who has extensively researched FBI operations during the Hoover era. The man who built his career on collecting other people's secrets became vulnerable when mobsters collected his. The exact nature of these alleged photographs has been debated for years. Some accounts suggest they showed Hoover in drag at private parties. Others claim the photos documented his long-rumored intimate relationship with his deputy and constant companion, Clyde Tolson. Whatever they contained, the threat of their release was apparently serious enough to influence FBI policy at the highest level. For decades, Hoover publicly denied the very existence of organized crime in America, noted a former Justice Department official familiar with the Bureau's operations. He insisted that the Mafia was a myth, even as mobsters like Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, and Sam Giancana were building criminal empires that reached deep into the entertainment industry. This inexplicable blind spot allowed organized crime to flourish, particularly in Hollywood, where mob influence extended into unions, nightclubs, and eventually Las Vegas casinos that attracted entertainment's biggest stars. The entertainment industry became a playground for criminals who knew they had little to fear from federal authorities. Hoover's denial of organized crime wasn't just a policy position. It was protection, asserted an investigative journalist who has written extensively about the Mafia's Hollywood connections. As long as he maintained this fiction, the compromising materials stayed locked away in mob vaults rather than splashed across newspaper front pages. The consequences for Hollywood were profound. Stars found themselves entertaining, dating, and sometimes working for mob figures who operated with impunity. Studio executives had to navigate relationships with union leaders who had criminal connections, and the line between the entertainment industry and organized crime became increasingly blurred as both worlds benefited from Hoover's deliberate inaction. This wasn't just about Hoover's personal reputation. emphasized a crime historian. This was about the entire moral authority of American law enforcement. If the public had known that the nation's top cop was effectively being controlled by the very criminals he was supposed to pursue, the damage to institutional trust would have been incalculable. The ultimate secret in Hoover's files, his vulnerability to blackmail, helps explain many of his otherwise puzzling decisions and policies. It also sets the stage for understanding how he used similar tactics against others, compiling compromising information that could be deployed whenever necessary to maintain his grip on power.
These women frighten me.
Why?
I don't know. Somehow they seem to put me at a disadvantage.
The Cary Grant / Randolph Scott voyeurism tapes. Cary Grant epitomized Hollywood sophistication. His transatlantic accent, impeccable style, and charismatic screen presence made him one of the most beloved leading men in cinema history. But behind the carefully crafted public image lurked a private reality that Hoover's FBI meticulously documented through years of intrusive surveillance. Grant was a prime target for Hoover, explained a film historian who specializes in Golden Age Hollywood. His enormous popularity and his long-term living arrangement with fellow actor Randolph Scott raised flags with the Bureau, which was obsessed with monitoring what Hoover considered sexual deviancy. For over a decade, Grant and Scott shared a beachfront home in Santa Monica that became known in Hollywood circles as Bachelor Hall. While the two men maintained public relationships with women, Grant was married 5 times, their domestic partnership generated persistent rumors and apparently caught Hoover's attention. The FBI didn't just maintain a file on Grant, revealed a researcher who has studied the Bureau's Hollywood operations. According to former agents, Hoover authorized extensive technical surveillance of Grant's home, including listening devices that captured intensely private moments. The resulting transcripts and recordings were stored in Hoover's personal files, ready to be weaponized if necessary. This surveillance was part of a larger pattern. Hoover's FBI took a particular interest in the sexual lives of public figures, especially those who didn't conform to traditional expectations. In an era when homosexuality was both criminalized and stigmatized, evidence of same-sex relationships could instantly destroy even the most successful career. It's important to understand that this wasn't just about gathering information, noted a cultural historian. It was about control. By possessing these recordings and transcripts, Hoover effectively held Grant's career and reputation hostage. The star had to operate knowing that his most intimate moments could be exposed at any time. What makes this surveillance particularly disturbing is its purely exploitative nature. Grant was never suspected of any crime or security threat. The intrusion into his private life was based solely on Hoover's personal agenda and his desire to maintain leverage over influential figures. This wasn't law enforcement. It was voyeurism sanctioned by the state, asserted a civil liberties expert. The tremendous power of the FBI was being used to peer into bedrooms and gather compromising information for potential blackmail, completely untethered from any legitimate investigative purpose. The Grant surveillance operation represents just one example of how Hoover's FBI routinely violated the privacy of Hollywood figures, treating their personal lives as intelligence targets to be exploited rather than private matters deserving of constitutional protection.
Adam and Eve.
I was afraid you'd misunderstand about that.
Oh, what?
The Marilyn Monroe Communist Conspiracy. Marilyn Monroe's tragic death in 1962 has generated countless conspiracy theories, but what many people don't realize is how extensively the FBI monitored her during her lifetime, not primarily because of her high-profile relationships with the Kennedy brothers, but because of her associations with individuals suspected of communist sympathies. Monroe's FBI file is massive, noted a historian who has studied declassified Bureau documents. Hoover's agents documented her every move, relationship, and political statement. But what's particularly interesting is how they used her supposed political connections to justify surveillance that was clearly motivated by interest in her personal life. Monroe's friendship with figures like playwright Arthur Miller, whom she married in 1956, and acting coach Lee Strasberg raised red flags with Hoover's rabidly anti-communist FBI. Miller had been called before the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1956, and his refusal to name names marked him as suspicious in the Bureau's eyes. This was classic Hoover, explained a biographer who has studied both Monroe and the FBI director. He would use legitimate national security concerns, in this case, the fear of communist infiltration, to justify collecting intimate details about celebrities that could later be used for leverage or control. The FBI files on Monroe contain detailed accounts of her movements, relationships, and private conversations. As her connections to the Kennedy family deepened, this surveillance intensified, creating a triangulation of Hollywood glamour, political power, and FBI intrusion that would have explosive potential. Hoover hated the Kennedys, observed a political historian specializing in the Cold War era. He saw Monroe as a vulnerability he could potentially exploit against them. The fact that she had connections to people with left-leaning politics gave him the perfect pretext to build a comprehensive file on her personal life. What makes Monroe's case particularly disturbing is how it demonstrates the intersection of Hoover's various obsessions: his anti-communist fervor, his fascination with celebrity, and his desire to collect compromising information about political rivals. Monroe found herself caught in this web of surveillance and exploitation, her already difficult life made more challenging by the knowledge that she was being constantly watched. The tragedy of Monroe's story is compounded by the revelation of how she was used as a pawn in these larger power games, reflected a film scholar. Her file represents the perfect storm of Hoover's obsessions: sex, power, politics, and Hollywood, all converging in the life of one vulnerable woman. The extensive documentation of Monroe's life contained in FBI files raises troubling questions about how this information might have been used, and whether it might contain clues about her final days that remain hidden from the public even decades after her death.
Can I tell a story about what this man did to me once? You may have known or heard about this. It was a true story.
The Frank Sinatra mob compromise. Frank Sinatra's legendary voice made him one of the most successful entertainers in American history, but his connections to organized crime figures created a complicated relationship with the FBI that Hoover documented in exhaustive detail, creating a file that exposed the deep entanglement between entertainment, politics, and the criminal underworld. Sinatra's FBI file runs thousands of pages, revealed an investigative journalist who has studied the declassified documents. It meticulously traces his decades-long friendships with major organized crime figures like Sam Giancana, Carlo Gambino, and Lucky Luciano. Yet despite this mountain of evidence linking him to the mafia, Sinatra was never charged with any crime related to these associations. This apparent immunity raises profound questions about the selective enforcement of laws and the complex power dynamics that allowed certain relationships to continue despite being thoroughly documented by federal authorities. Hoover was in an impossible position with Sinatra, explained a historian specializing in organized crime. The singer was too connected, too popular, and too valuable to too many powerful people to touch. His friendship with the Kennedys, whom Hoover despised, made the situation even more complicated. Sinatra reportedly helped connect John F. Kennedy with Judith Campbell Exner, who was simultaneously involved with the president and mob boss Sam Giancana, creating a direct line between the White House and organized crime that horrified Hoover even as he compiled evidence of the arrangement. The Sinatra file reveals the hypocrisy at the heart of Hoover's FBI, noted a former federal prosecutor. Here was a law enforcement agency documenting criminal associations in minute detail, yet taking no action because the subject was too famous, too well connected, and potentially had too much compromising information about others. What makes the Sinatra case particularly significant is how it demonstrates the complex web of mutual compromise that characterized Hoover's relationship with Hollywood. The FBI director possessed damaging information about Sinatra's mob connections, but Sinatra himself was connected to political figures Hoover feared, creating a stalemate where exposure would have been mutually assured destruction. Sinatra operated at the center of an intricate power structure that included entertainment, politics, and crime, observed a cultural historian. Hoover's extensive documentation of these connections gave him leverage, but using it would have triggered a cascade of revelations that might have damaged the Bureau itself. The Sinatra file stands as perhaps the clearest example of how Hoover used information gathering not necessarily for law enforcement purposes, but as a form of insurance, collecting compromising material that could be deployed strategically when needed, while allowing certain activities to continue undisturbed as long as the overall power balance remained favorable.
Yes, I
had this impression.
think I say this without any false modesty. I think it has a certain charm.
Charlie Chaplin's immorality dossier. Charlie Chaplin created the iconic Little Tramp character that made him the world's first global film star, but his political views and personal life made him a target for J. Edgar Hoover, who compiled a massive file documenting what the Bureau considered moral transgressions, ultimately contributing to the comedian's effective exile from the United States. Hoover's fixation on Chaplin was extraordinary, explained a film historian who has studied the FBI's role in Hollywood. The Bureau maintained a file on him for decades, focusing particularly on his marriages to very young women and his left-leaning political statements. This wasn't just passive information gathering, it was an active campaign to discredit and ultimately remove one of cinema's greatest artists. Chaplin's marriages became a central focus of the FBI's investigation. He married Mildred Harris when she was 16 and he was 29, Lita Gray when she was 16 and he was 35, and had relationships with other teenage actresses during his career. While these relationships raised legitimate ethical concerns, the FBI's interest was less about protecting young women and more about finding leverage against a man whose politics Hoover despised. Chaplin expressed sympathy for the Soviet Union during World War II when they were America's allies, noted a political historian. But after the war, as the Cold War intensified, these same statements were reframed as evidence of communist sympathies. Hoover used Chaplin's personal life to bolster the case against him as politically dangerous. The campaign against Chaplin reached its climax in 1952. While the comedian was traveling abroad, the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service, working closely with the FBI, revoked his re-entry permit. Effectively exiled from the country where he had made his fortune and career, Chaplin settled in Switzerland and would not return to the United States for 20 years. This was Hoover's power on full display, asserted a civil liberties attorney who has studied FBI abuses of power. He used government machinery to punish an artist for his political views, weaponizing moral judgments about his personal life to build public support for what was essentially a political expulsion. What makes the Chaplin case particularly disturbing is how it foreshadowed tactics that would be used against other entertainment figures in the years to come. The strategic deployment of information about personal behavior to discredit political expression, creating a climate of fear where private life became a potential weapon against public speech. Chaplin's exile sent a clear message to everyone in Hollywood, observed a scholar of censorship and creative freedom. It demonstrated that no star was too big to be taken down if they crossed certain lines, and that Hoover was willing to use the full weight of federal power to punish those he considered threats to his vision of America. The Chaplin file stands as a stark example of how Hoover's FBI moved beyond mere surveillance into active intervention, using the information it gathered to reshape the cultural landscape by removing influential voices that challenged the political and social status quo. The Blacklist Maker's List of Secret Gays. While the Hollywood blacklist is remembered primarily as a tool to purge suspected communists from the entertainment industry, J. Edgar Hoover maintained a parallel system of files documenting the sexual orientation of countless actors, directors, writers, and executives. Information that could be deployed to destroy careers during what historians now call the Lavender Scare. Hoover's obsession with homosexuality was pathological, explained a historian who has studied FBI surveillance of LGBTQ+ Americans. His agents compiled extensive lists of suspected gay men and lesbians in the entertainment industry, creating a shadow blacklist that could be just as devastating as the political one that dominated headlines. During the 1950s, as Senator Joseph McCarthy led his anti-communist crusade, a simultaneous purge targeted gay and lesbian government employees who were considered security risks due to their perceived vulnerability to blackmail. This same rationale was used to justify the FBI's intensive documentation of sexual orientation in Hollywood. The irony is staggering, noted a scholar of LGBTQ+ history. The government claimed gay people were security risks because they could be blackmailed over their sexuality, then proceeded to compile exactly the kind of information that would make such blackmail possible. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy that created vulnerability where it claimed to find it. The names in these files included some of Hollywood's most beloved stars, powerful directors, and influential producers. Many maintained carefully constructed public images of heterosexual normalcy through lavender marriages, arrangements where gay men and lesbian women married each other to provide mutual cover, while living authentic lives only within trusted circles. These files weren't just passive collections of gossip, emphasized a former federal prosecutor who has studied FBI operations. They were actively used to pressure people in the industry. Studios would receive friendly visits from FBI agents suggesting certain individuals were security risks or moral problems, leading to quietly terminated contracts and derailed careers. What makes these files particularly disturbing is their fundamentally extra-legal nature. No laws were being enforced, no legitimate security threats investigated. This was pure social control, the use of state power to enforce conformity to sexual norms that had nothing to do with professional qualifications or actual criminal behavior. For decades, talented people lived in constant fear that their careers could end instantly if the wrong piece of information reached the wrong desk, observed a film historian. The creative and human cost of this campaign is incalculable. The roles not played, the films not directed, the scripts not written by people who were pushed out of the industry or forced to live in paralyzing fear. The sexual surveillance files represent one of the most shameful episodes in the FBI's history, a systematic campaign of intimidation against a vulnerable minority that had profound consequences for individual lives and for American culture as a whole.
And a desire to be involved in a great effort, which really runs through our people, with all the emphasis on the
bugging of JFK's Hollywood flings. John F. Kennedy's charisma and youth made him a natural fit with Hollywood's glamour. But his extramarital relationships with actresses and starlets created a vulnerability that J. Edgar Hoover exploited through extensive surveillance, creating a treasure trove of compromising information that gave the FBI director leverage over the president himself. Kennedy's connections to Hollywood went beyond fundraisers and public appearances, explained a presidential historian. He maintained relationships with numerous women in the entertainment industry, often using friends like Frank Sinatra as intermediaries to arrange discreet meetings in Los Angeles hotels and private homes. Hoover, who already distrusted Kennedy's politics and resented his popularity, saw these liaisons as both a moral failing to be documented and a strategic opportunity to gain control over the administration. FBI agents reportedly bugged hotel rooms at the Chateau Marmont and other Hollywood establishments when Kennedy visited, creating recordings and transcripts of deeply private encounters. This wasn't about national security or law enforcement, asserted a former Justice Department official. This was about power. Hoover was creating an insurance policy that would prevent Kennedy from replacing him as FBI director and give him influence over administration policy. The surveillance operation captured not just the president's indiscretions, but also the words of Hollywood stars and starlets who had no idea their private conversations were being recorded for potential use as political leverage. These individuals became unwitting pawns in a high-stakes power game between two of the most powerful men in America. The recordings documented not just sexual encounters, but intimate conversations, revealed a researcher who has interviewed former FBI agents from the era. Kennedy would sometimes discuss political matters, administration infighting, and even aspects of foreign policy with these women, creating potential national security issues that further justified, in Hoover's mind, the continuation of the surveillance. What makes these operations particularly disturbing is how they blurred the line between legitimate national security concerns and personal vendetta. While a president's vulnerability to blackmail might indeed raise security questions, Hoover's collection and retention of this material served his own power interests first and foremost. Hoover effectively prevented Kennedy from firing him by letting him know, through subtle and not so subtle means, that he possessed this compromising material, noted a biographer who has studied both men. It created a Mexican standoff where Kennedy couldn't move against Hoover without risking personal and political destruction. The Hollywood surveillance files reveal how thoroughly the entertainment industry had become a theater of operations for Hoover's FBI, a place where political, sexual, and power dynamics converged to create uniquely valuable intelligence that could be used to maintain the director's position at the center of American power.
There were some pictures made of her, but it was no big romance.
Elvis Presley's blackmail attempt. Elvis Presley revolutionized American popular music and became a global icon, but even the king of rock and roll found himself entangled in the web of surveillance, threats, and power plays that characterized Hollywood during the Hoover era, becoming both an FBI informant and the target of a shocking blackmail attempt that required bureau intervention. Presley's relationship with the FBI was complex, explained a music historian who has studied the singer's career and the recently declassified portions of his FBI file. On one hand, Hoover viewed rock and roll as a dangerous cultural force corrupting American youth. On the other hand, Presley was vehemently anti-communist and eventually cultivated a relationship with the Bureau, even meeting with Hoover in 1970. This complicated dynamic created a situation where Presley was simultaneously under surveillance and in contact with the FBI, a relationship that would prove crucial when he found himself targeted by a sophisticated blackmail operation that threatened to destroy his carefully maintained public image. According to FBI documents, a former associate of Presley attempted to extort a substantial sum by threatening to release materials, possibly photographs or recordings, that would allegedly expose the star as homosexual, revealed an investigative journalist who has reviewed the declassified files. This was not just a financial threat, but an existential one to Presley's entire career and persona. The FBI became involved in the case, investigating the blackmail attempt not just as a crime against Presley, but as a threat to a valuable contact and potential intelligence asset. The Bureau's interest in protecting Presley stemmed not from celebrity favoritism, but from cold calculation about his potential usefulness. This case illustrates the circular nature of Hollywood's blackmail economy, observed a criminologist who studies extortion schemes targeting public figures. The same type of compromising information that Hoover collected for leverage was being used by private individuals for financial gain, creating a situation where the FBI was investigating a crime that mirrored its own tactics. What makes this case particularly significant is how it highlights the impossible situation many celebrities faced in this era, vulnerable to exposure and extortion while simultaneously dependent on law enforcement agencies that were themselves collecting compromising information. The need for protection forced many stars into cooperative relationships with the very institutions that represented another form of threat. Presley's case wasn't unique, noted a former entertainment lawyer. Many stars found themselves trapped between private blackmailers and institutional surveillance, never knowing when either might deploy the secrets they had collected. This created a climate of perpetual anxiety where authentic self-expression became almost impossible. The resolution of the blackmail attempt remains partially classified, but the very existence of this case in FBI files demonstrates how thoroughly the boundaries between entertainment, crime, and government had blurred, creating a shadow world where information became the ultimate currency and privacy became an unattainable luxury.
That's silly. We're just very good friends.
The truth behind Thelma Todd's self-death. Thelma Todd's blonde beauty and comic timing made her a standout in the 1930s Hollywood, starring alongside the Marx Brothers, Buster Keaton, and Laurel and Hardy. But her mysterious death in 1935, officially ruled a self-death, has generated decades of speculation about mob involvement that may have been documented in FBI files that remain partially sealed even today. Todd's death represents one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries, explained a film historian specializing in the studio era. She was found dead in her car from carbon monoxide poisoning, officially ruled a self-death or accident. But persistent rumors have suggested she was murdered by organized crime figures who wanted control of her popular restaurant and the gambling operation allegedly run from its upper floor. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, despite the director's public denial of the mafia's existence, maintained extensive files on organized crime activities in Los Angeles, including operations that intersected with the entertainment industry. These files reportedly contain information about Todd's death that contradicts the official finding. The FBI files and local police records tell completely different stories, asserted a researcher who has studied the case for years. While the local investigation rushed to close the case as a self-death, federal agents were collecting witness statements and evidence suggesting that Todd was killed after refusing to allow mobsters to use her restaurant, Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe, as a front for illegal gambling. The conflict between local and federal investigations created a situation where the truth became fractured and obscured, with different parts of the story held by different agencies, none of which had the complete picture or the motivation to pursue justice at the expense of revealing their own operations. Hoover's FBI would have had significant reasons to keep any evidence of mob involvement quiet, noted a historian of organized crime. Acknowledging such a high-profile mob hit would contradict Hoover's public position that organized crime didn't exist as a national phenomenon. It would raise uncomfortable questions about why the Bureau wasn't taking action against these criminal organizations. What makes Todd's case particularly significant is how it exemplifies the way Hollywood figures could become collateral damage in the complex relationship between law enforcement, organized crime, and the entertainment industry. Her death occurred at the intersection of these powerful forces, with the truth becoming a casualty of their competing interests. The files on Todd's death likely contain crucial evidence that has never been fully revealed, suggested a former prosecutor who has studied cold cases from this era. The partial release of redacted documents has only fueled speculation rather than providing closure, highlighting how thoroughly information control has shaped our understanding of Hollywood history. The lingering questions about Todd's death demonstrate how Hoover's information management wasn't just about collecting secrets, but about controlling which secrets became public, a power that extended beyond his lifetime through classified files and redacted documents that continue to shield potentially explosive truths about Hollywood's darkest chapter. The files that were burned. The most explosive secrets in J. Edgar Hoover's collection may remain forever unknown. On May 2, 1972, as news of Hoover's death spread through Washington, his loyal executive assistant Helen Gandy began a process that would dramatically alter American history: the systematic destruction of the director's most sensitive official and confidential files before anyone else could access them. Gandy had been Hoover's trusted assistant for over 50 years, explained a historian who has studied the FBI's inner workings. She knew exactly where he kept his most explosive files, the ones too sensitive even for the FBI's official records system, and she was determined to protect them from falling into the wrong hands after his death. Over the next several days, Gandy methodically sorted through Hoover's personal files, removing and destroying countless documents before government officials could examine them. This destruction continued even after the acting FBI director ordered her to stop, with Gandy insisting she was following Hoover's long-standing instructions. This wasn't just routine record destruction, emphasized a government transparency advocate. These were files containing information so potentially damaging that Hoover had kept them separate from official FBI records, material that could have exposed decades of illegal surveillance, blackmail operations, and abuses of power-targeting Hollywood figures, politicians, and civil rights leaders. The full contents of these destroyed files will never be known, but former agents and witnesses have suggested they contained the most compromising material Hoover had collected, including the alleged photographs of Hoover himself that had given organized crime leverage over the FBI, evidence of illegal wiretaps on prominent Americans, and documentation of operations that violated numerous laws and constitutional protections. Gandy's destruction of these files effectively erased crucial evidence about how power really worked in America during Hoover's reign, noted a legal historian. It eliminated the paper trail that might have led to accountability for decades of surveillance abuses and prevented a full reckoning with how thoroughly Hollywood had been infiltrated, manipulated, and controlled through information warfare. What makes this destruction particularly significant is how it represents the final act in Hoover's long campaign of information control, ensuring that even after his death, he would maintain power over which secrets came to light and which remained buried. The burning of these files wasn't just destruction of government property, it was the culmination of a career built on the strategic deployment of information as a weapon. We'll never know exactly what was lost in those files, reflected a former Justice Department official, but we can be certain it would have transformed our understanding of American power in the 20th century, particularly the hidden relationships between government, entertainment, and organized crime that shaped our culture in ways we're still struggling to comprehend. The ashes of those burned documents represent perhaps the ultimate Hollywood secret, the final cutting room floor where the most revealing scenes of America's hidden history were permanently erased, leaving behind only fragmentary hints of the full, disturbing truth.